When you hear the words hazardous materials, many things might come to mind. There are irritants, toxins, even explosives. And those are just some examples of hazmats. But just because these are all hazardous materials, you can't treat them all the same. In fact, most hazmats require unique handling and storage, as well as the use of specific protective equipment in order to work with them safely. So you need to know how to easily find out what a hazardous material is and the precautions you should take when you're handling it to protect yourself and your patients. One of the best ways to find this information is on the container label. They are designed so that workers can quickly identify a material and its hazards. But just like there are different types of hazardous materials, there are different systems for labeling them. And it's important to be familiar with the most frequently used systems so you can easily access the information you need, especially in an emergency. In this program, we'll discuss some of the most common systems that are used for labeling hazmats and how you can use these systems to stay informed and stay safe. One of the best ways to get information about a hazardous material is through its container label. In fact, labeling containers is so important that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the Department of Transportation, DOT, and the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, all have their own labeling requirements for the materials that they regulate. And these systems have all evolved over time. For instance, in 2012, OSHA integrated the globally harmonized system for the classification and labeling of chemicals, GHS, into the Hazard Communication Standard. And in 2024, OSHA established a final rule for the HazCom standard that addressed areas of confusion and gave workers the right to understand the sources of hazmat information, like labels that they can access. According to the HazCom standard, GHS labels must be used on manufacturers' and distributors' chemical containers, as well as on any containers that are used to transport hazmats. OSHA also requires that warning labels appear on all in-house chemical storage containers. So even if you don't work with original containers of hazardous chemicals, you still have access to important information. Facilities must also attach warning labels to any other types of containers, such as secondary containers like buckets or spray bottles that hazardous substances are transferred into. At a minimum, these labels must include the name of the hazardous material, associated hazard warnings, and the name, address, and telephone number of the manufacturer, importer, or distributor of the material. While OSHA is concerned about all types of hazardous materials, the focus of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, is on hazardous waste. Any containers of hazmats that are being disposed of must have labels that identify each of the individual materials in the containers, no matter how thoroughly they are blended together. EPA hazardous waste labels must also include the originating company's name, address, and telephone number. The third government agency that has hazmat labeling requirements is the Department of Transportation, which covers materials that are being transported. So the DOT's labeling requirements apply to the containers of hazardous materials that are being moved from place to place, as well as the conveyances that move them. This can include trucks, planes, ships, even pipelines. While the labeling requirements of these three government agencies have some significant differences, they all have some things in common as well. First, all of the agencies require that labels be firmly attached to their containers. However, the term container is defined fairly broadly by each group and can include bottles, boxes, drums, barrels, cylinders, process vats, and tanks. Second, all of the agencies require that hazardous materials labels be displayed prominently so that they are easily noticed by anyone working with the container. The third thing that these agencies agree on is that the information on all labels must be legible, which is especially important if the label contains handwritten information or the container is in a facility where the label could be smeared or otherwise damaged. The systems that are used most often on hazmats include the Globally Harmonized System (GHS), Department of Transportation (DOT) hazard class labels, Hazardous Materials Identification System (HMIS) labels, National Fire Prevention Association (NFPA) labels, and Environmental Protection Agency (EPA) hazardous waste labels. People all over the world work with hazardous materials. But even though many of them speak different languages, they all need easy access to the same information about these materials. So the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, needed a uniform system for presenting that information on hazardous materials container labels under the Hazard Communication Standard. They found it in the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals created by the United Nations. The Globally Harmonized System, GHS, helps people anywhere in the world get accurate information about hazardous materials with just a quick glance at their labels. To do this, the system standardizes how materials are classified, how their hazards and safety precautions are described, and how this information is presented. This way, all workers can find the information they need even under pressure. The GHS begins the process of standardizing hazmat information by dividing materials into hazard classes, which are represented by 9 different pictograms. GHS container labels also use text elements to convey 5 types of information about a material, including its name, a signal word, a hazard statement, precautionary information, and the name and contact information of its supplier. The Globally Harmonized System also provides guidelines for how these elements should be positioned on a label, so a worker always knows where to look to find the information that they need. Under the Hazard Communication Standard, GHS compliant labels must be displayed on almost all hazmat containers, but there are some unique considerations for in-house containers, small containers, 100 milliliters or less, and containers that are part of bulk shipments. In-house containers are secondary containers that will never leave a facility. While in-house labels do not have to follow the GHS format, they do have to display all of the information that is required by the system. But there are instances where a GHS compliant label might not fit on small containers that are 100 milliliters or less. So OSHA states that if a manufacturer can demonstrate that they cannot use a label that contains all of the required information due to the size of a product that they produce, they may provide less information than is normally required on the container label. And if those manufacturers have any containers that are 3 milliliters or less, they don't have to have a label on the container at all. But any container without a full label must have all the required information on its box or other outer package. For shipments of bulk hazmats, OSHA allows their labels to be placed either directly on the bulk containers or transmitted through shipping papers, bills of lading, or electronic means. A system that addresses OSHA's in-house labeling requirements for the end users of hazardous chemicals is the Hazardous Materials Identification System. Over time, various versions of the system have been developed, but the most common uses 4 color-coded categories: blue for health hazards, red for materials that are flammable, yellow or orange represent reactivity or physical hazards, and white tells workers what personal protective equipment (PPE) they should use when working with the material. Numbers are used within each category to indicate the degree of the hazard. In the health category, 0 indicates minimal danger. Exposure to this substance poses no significant risk to your health. 1 indicates a slight hazard. Being exposed to this type of substance might cause irritation or minor injuries. 2 indicates moderate danger, meaning the substance can be hazardous to your health. You know a substance poses a serious danger when it is labeled with a 3. Being exposed to it could lead to severe injuries or health problems. And Category 4 indicates that a material is deadly, meaning even the slightest exposure to the substance can be life-threatening. In the flammability category, materials are labeled depending on their flash point, which determines how likely they are to burn. Materials that will not burn at all are labeled with a 0, while a 1 represents materials with flash points above 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which are difficult to ignite. They must be preheated to burn. Chemicals with flash points between 100 and 200 degrees Fahrenheit are designated as a 2, which are more likely to ignite when heated. And 3 identifies substances with flash points between 73 degrees and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which means they ignite fairly easily at normal temperatures. Materials that are most likely to burn are coded with a 4, which indicates that a material has a flash point below 73 degrees Fahrenheit or a boiling point below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, making them extremely flammable. Looking at the reactivity and physical hazards category, 0 means that the substance is normally stable and is not reactive with water. A 1 tells you that the substance is a slight physical hazard, meaning it is normally stable but has the potential to become unstable at elevated temperatures and pressures. A 2 indicates that the substance can undergo violent chemical changes at elevated temperatures or pressures, or that it reacts violently with water. A 3 means that the material can be detonated by a strong initiating source, such as heat, shock, or water. And 4 represents substances that are capable of exploding at normal temperatures and pressures, which makes them very dangerous. Using this combination of colors and numbers, you can create a good picture of the hazards that are associated with a substance. For example, an HMIS label for gasoline would have a 1 in the blue space, since gasoline is only a slight health hazard, a 3 in the red space, because it can ignite at below 100 degrees Fahrenheit and is a flammability hazard, and a 0 in the yellow or orange space, since it is normally stable and is not reactive with water. In addition to these hazard numbers, the personal protective equipment (PPE) that should be worn when handling the substance is identified in the white space of the label by the capital letters A through K. By consulting a chart or a wallet card that shows what each letter stands for, it's easy to see what level of protection is needed. For instance, the capital letter C indicates that safety glasses, gloves, and a synthetic apron should be worn when working with the material. If the personal protection column is marked with an X, special handling is required, in which case you will need to get additional information from the material's SDS or your supervisor. Some variations of the HMIS system use pictograms instead of letters to show what PPE should be worn, which makes it even easier to determine what you need. The labels for some hazardous substances may also provide target organ information that shows which organs can be affected by exposure to the substance. This can typically be found in the text at the bottom of the label. You also need to look for an asterisk in the health hazard section of an HMIS label. This indicates that the substance is a chronic health hazard and that repeated exposure to it could cause health problems. If you encounter labels that contain any of these special warnings, consult the material's SDS for more information, or ask your supervisor about how it should be handled. When a hazardous material is involved in a fire, it can have disastrous results for you and your patients, so you need to act fast. That's why the National Fire Prevention Association, NFPA, has a system for labels that focuses on information that is important when a chemical is involved in a fire. NFPA labels are diamond-shaped and, like several other labeling systems, use 4 color-coded sections to convey their hazard information. The red area at the top of the label shows the material's degree of flammability, which is of particular interest for a fire control agency such as the NFPA. On the right, the yellow section indicates how stable the substance is, and the blue quadrant on the left tells you how likely the substance is to cause health problems. The white area at the bottom of NFPA labels contains icons that indicate if the substance is a special hazard. 3 of the most frequently seen special hazard icons are for radioactive materials, which are indicated by the international symbol for radioactivity; water-reactive materials, which are identified by the capital letter W with a line drawn through it; and oxidizers, which are designated by the capital letters OX. This is important information to know because water-reactive substances and oxidizers can present special fire control issues. If a water-reactive chemical comes into contact with water, it will actually cause a fire or explosion. And oxidizing chemicals release oxygen into the atmosphere, making everything in the area more flammable than normal. Like the HMIS system, the NFPA system uses numbers to represent the severity of each type of hazard. On 3 of the quadrants, you'll see a 1 through a 4. A 0 indicates that the substance poses little to no hazard, while a 4 identifies the substance as a severe hazard. Hazardous materials labels can help to keep you, your patients, and your coworkers safe when you're handling potentially dangerous substances, but only if you know how to read them. That's why it's important to understand the different labeling systems and how you can use them to find the information you need. Let's review. One of the most important sources of information about a hazardous material is its container label. Some of the most common hazardous material labeling systems are the Globally Harmonized System, GHS, the Hazardous Materials Identification System, HMIS, and the National Fire Prevention Association, NFPA system. The GHS, created by the United Nations, standardizes the way hazmats are classified and how that information is presented. The Hazardous Materials Identification System addresses how in-house containers should be labeled in order to protect the end users of a hazmat. The NFPA's labeling system provides information that is important to firefighters when a hazardous material is involved in a fire. Now that you know some of the most often used types of hazardous material labels and the information you can find on them, you can keep yourself your patients, your coworkers, and your facility safer every day.